Start recording.
All right. Cool. So thanks for joining, everyone. And this is a good attendance since I last joined a meeting and then basically disappeared in vacations. Should we go through the action items first, or should we? Are there new people here that didn't introduce themselves, or I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm MTAC on GitHub and work for Brainium Studios, and we make mobile games, and we've been slowly working on Rust for, I guess, about a year now.
Oh, hello there.
Hey.
That's good to hear. All right.
We can just go full circle and everyone introduce them. I'm Remco. I've been working in the VR and game industry for the past 5 years, and some of the work that you might have seen floating around the internet with me recently is hot reloading in Rust that we're doing as an experiment for our scripting language.
It's cool. Right. Anyone else new that wants to introduce themselves, or?
I've stopped in here once to listen in, but I'm Kel at this transient. I'm just stopping by to listen in.
All right.
I'm Francesca64 on GitHub. I also work at Brainium with Tyler, so you already know what that is. Hi.
Hi. Welcome.
Hello.
All right. So let's
And
go
there's
through
more.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's very funny that you said if anyone shows up, because
Yeah,
now we got a whole party here.
Is this the biggest the meeting has been?
Probably. At least it's the biggest one I've ever seen. Well, we can go through the discussion items because I think there's a lot to talk about. So then I'll take the notes. So first things first, gather info and guidance around placement new language feature or possible workarounds. Who was driving this?
I think it was Emsgrath is I think their name, but they were at the last meeting, but they don't appear to be here today.
I had filed the bug a couple weeks ago. Sorry, I missed the introductions. I was having audio problems.
Hey.
Well, go on, Philip, if you have anything to say.
I don't really have anything particular to say about it, and I wouldn't necessarily say this is like a blocking issue or anything, but it is a parity issue with C and C++ that people are going to expect it to be there. So that's really the main reason I brought it up, is I'm just trying to find all the things that are different between what Rust can do and what C and C++ can do. And it doesn't have to be one-to-one. I don't know that Rust has to do everything that C and C++ does, but it's good to know about them and be aware of them, and if there's alternatives, to make sure it's documented and well understood, and the rationale of it if possible. Like maybe it's not very important. Maybe the optimizing is so good that it's just not worth doing. On the other hand, if we do just find that there would be practical advantages, not just for games, but maybe even for non-games, it may be worth bringing that up with the language team to discuss further.
Does this have an open issue somewhere that we can link
to? Issue 48 on the working group.
In the working group.
I see that Dimitri posted something that there's a bit of support that landed in the compiler. Did you check that out, Philip?
Was that the maybe uninit?
For what I can see, it says add API for initialized box, RC, and arc plus get unchecked. But it's the maybe uninit, yeah.
Yeah, I think I saw the maybe uninit stuff. The thing is, that's not really safe. Like, of course, you can write unsafe code and do whatever you want, pass a pointer, and But that's not really ideal, I don't think.
But I don't see how it could be safe.
Well, if the compiler was
Because
able to verify that in that function every field actually got set and it was done without reading anything from that memory, then it could be safe.
Yeah, with compiler support, it should be safeable.
Well, just because something is unsafe, like requires an unsafe block, doesn't necessarily mean that it's like something that will break. It just means that the rules around it are a lot more difficult to manage.
Would
Like,
it,
I think a great example of like something that ends up in common usage, but like I'm trying to like write a blog post on this right now, is splitting mute borrows on a collection, like that are non-overlapping. You basically are required to transmute lifetimes or convert into a raw pointer, and it requires an unsafe block, no matter how you go about it.
like vector split, or
Yeah, exactly like vector split.
would it be possible? It looks just like skimming through the issue. It's been a while since I've read this, but it looks like if you can use maybe on init to do this, is there any way we could use like macros to expose that in a relatively safe way, so you can get that feature, you can use it safely, and doesn't have to have compiler support? Because this is seems like a fairly niche thing, so I'm not sure if having like full-on in-language compiler support is necessary.
We have compiler support for very small things that
Okay.
are fully safe, and this is an important thing that is unsafe. So I think it merits having the compiler be able to do this check,
Okay.
particularly when macros are mixed with unsafe, is when you get some of the most potentially dangerous code, because people
Fair
use
enough.
macros all over. So I mean, like, so the compiler can see that a struct has X many fields, and it can see if you wrote to each field at least once within a given function. So it should be, scare quotes, relatively simple to say that you took a maybe on init, you wrote to each field once. We're going to call it good.
Okay.
Um, and I'm sure there's all sorts of complications there.
so I think if we really want this, we need to write an RFC, because if there is, maybe we can actually talk with the compiler people first, but that's the way we can propose something that's doable if we really think that's important. Because otherwise, we will not probably make any progress on this with the language team.
Maybe
Let's-
uninit has already kind of been through the ringer at this point.
Yeah, so I wonder if. Okay, maybe we can put a note on that.
We could
otherwise-
pre-RFC using the internals form and get
Yeah,
a
we
wider
can
audience.
discuss it there.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll make a note.
There already is a tracking issue for placement new, and as far as I could see, it's closed.
Maybe we can check why and.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. If you have that issue, can you link it in the issue number 48?
Yeah.
So
I
it
think
can be like a reference.
Philip might already have actually referenced, because I see here Charisma referenced this issue 7 days ago.
All right. Okay. Next, try working with something like, what's this here? Is this in relationship to the placement new, the next item in the agenda? Because
yeah, the next item was to see if people felt that it was ergonomic to simply like suggest a convention instead of having like my type new and you'd create it. If you'd have my type new here and you'd pass in a reference to a maybe on init and have it fill out that way, which would like you could do that today with no RFC and no changes, but the question was, does that feel good to use? I don't know if anyone's actually tried doing that. I don't but that was just one idea that we had last time.
Okay.
Also, something worth bringing up about Maybe on init is that it isn't possible to write to fields within a Maybe on init struct safely yet because of how like references work. Because like if you need to, in order to write into it, you need to create a mutable reference to it, and if mutable reference to undefined data exists at all, that is always undefined behavior. So there's discussion going around about like how to fix that, because that is a problem the language team is aware of, but it is worth bringing up that doesn't entirely work today.
I think, don't you use pointer right? Isn't that the current suggested solution?
Yes, if you're writing the entire struct, but how do you figure out where in the struct the thing you want to write is?
Oh, okay, yeah, I remember now. Okay.
So if I was going to try to use that today, I would probably just create the struct naturally and assign it, because I think the optimizer would take care of it in that case, because I think giving it maybe a pointer and putting the struct in there and then calling the function would be a lot easier for the optimizer to consistently lead the construction on the stack. Again, not guaranteed, doesn't work in debug, but I think it's more likely than a lot of the other options would be.
Okay. Low-level sound API is next. I don't think. Do we have anyone here that knows anything about sound?
I know that the libraries exist, but I don't know exactly what their scope is.
So, as I recall this from last meeting, the basic complaint was that right now Sapal is the base layer and Rodeo is built on top of that, and Sapal does a little bit too much for being a base layer, and Rodeo does not quite enough for being a higher level layer. So sort of trying to sift that out was the goal. There is like a sound like a Rust sound GitHub organization. I believe that they have taken over maintainership of those two crates, so work could be done in that area without like specifically having to go through Tomaka, but most people aren't sound experts and they don't want to fiddle with a foundational crate that they don't feel like they're an expert in the field.
What do you guys use at your game studio for sound with Rust?
We use Alto, just like directly, which is OpenAL bindings. And we added like I think Android support for that, so it should work on Android, iOS, and macOS anyway, which are the platforms we care about. And then all the decoders from Rodeo, we just kind of like pulled out and made standalone and work with Alto directly. So sort of a jerry-rig setup, definitely not ideal, but CPAL like didn't work for us at all. Yeah.
On mobile or in general?
In general, it was just there was too much latency. Like from the time you wanted to play a sound to the time it actually played the sound was like 4 or 5 frames, which was too much.
All right. That's, Ready at Dawn. I think there was a Twitter thread about this.
Yeah.
They said they wanted to join our meeting at some point, or?
Yeah, so the CTO mentioned that they were open to joining the meeting at some point when they were available. But I sent them a reminder that it was happening today at this time, but I guess they were not able to join, and I didn't get a response on that.
That's fine.
And Bike Studios, I approached them on Discord, and they mentioned that at this point they don't really see a point in joining the meetings themselves, but they want to keep a background role, and whenever we have questions we can direct them at them, and whenever they have anything to contribute they'll just approach us through the channels that we already have set up, like a more offline kind of approach.
Yeah, it's also at an inconvenient hour for like in general, I think, because it's 2 hours later now in Sweden, so it's 9 or 10:20 at night. So
Yeah.
I do get why.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and is there anything else besides this that we need?
Could I think it was it Philip who said that you use OpenAL?
That was me, Tyler.
Tyler, hey, so just looking at the Wikipedia page, it looks like OpenAL works practically everywhere. Do you
Yeah.
feel like it's a library that we could suggest, hey, you can use this today, like in the same sense that you can use SDL2 right now if you want a big C dependency, you can just use OpenAL and it'll work?
I believe that's the case. Don't quote me on that, because I definitely haven't tested Windows or
It does work.
yeah. But at least on Mac and Android, it works fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we could
And iOS.
we could investigate putting that on a sort of like, hey, if you want to get something working today, then this is how you do it.
Yep, and on Android it actually works via there's like a middle layer OpenAL soft, so it's like does some software conversion from the OpenAL calls to like OpenEL or something like that, which is what Android actually uses. Yeah, so there's definitely room to improve, but it's pretty solid. Yeah.
Okay. I think when I used SDL2 and I was attempting to use their Q audio API, I also ended up around 3 to 4 frames of latency to get the sound right. You'd have to queue about 3 frames ahead. So I don't know. Maybe that's just sort of what most audio libraries end up at if they're not good enough.
It's worth doing some investigation as to like what the latency situation is in general, because like that amount of time seems bad, but we don't really know what the like average amount of latency for stuff is.
I think, as I had it explained to me once, part of the problem with audio latency is that there's so much hardware variability that, like on a mobile device, it will probably end up being lower. But if you put it on a console or a computer and someone's sending audio through their HDMI TV to a mixer system and all that stuff, it can just put latency into the system, even if you do it perfect in your program. So you have to obviously you can't play an event before the event happens, so you're just kind of in trouble no matter what.
And there's like a fixed sort of like amount of sound that you send basically in chunks. So like, a 60th of a second worth of sound, you have to like send that continually. And I think the window size might be the term that they use in CPAL might be kind of big. I think there's a ticket for that actually on CPAL's repo.
Okay.
Talking about latency.
It seems strange that you wouldn't be able to customize that. That seems like completely naively. That seems like it'd be low hanging fruit, but I've also never touched that source code, so I've got no idea.
I was curious if we don't have anything else in the agenda for how does your CI look like for doing a game in Rust that works on mobile devices? What do you guys use? Anything?
We have a Jenkins server in a closet, so
All
and
right.
it's pretty, jerry-rigged. I think there's some tooling, hopefully, that we're working on that will make this easier, and that will we're definitely planning on open sourcing, so that you'll be able to just create a new project and have it work on iOS and Android without much hassle. Little cargo subcommand. Francesca's poking on it. Yeah.
So how would that work? So you have real devices, not emulators, that you connect to, or?
Oh, yeah, we test everything on Mac OS actually, and we build everything for Android and iOS. And then if we want to actually like test it, then we have to hook up a device to the computer and just run it on that. And simulator does work now as of Mac OS, the latest Mac OS. But yeah, we definitely don't have that as part of our CI.
Do not have it.
Yeah, we're not running tests on mobile.
Cool. So on that topic, I'm curious what were the biggest issues that you faced with running Rust for mobile games? I suppose there's some certain problems that you don't see on PC or whatever, Linux, Mac, Windows. So I was curious, like, if you have some examples of those types of issues, or did it just work out of the box, or?
Well, like the biggest problem is you can't just do cargo run, right? And target Android or iOS. So you have to create like an Xcode project and structure it and do like configuring there. Or you have to create like an Android Studio project and build everything as a shared library and have like a whole bunch of native activity glue that we sort of hacked together, I think, from Cargo APK and some other sources. And yeah, Android is definitely the most challenging right now. I would say that.
It's worth saying that I'm pretty sure that activity on Cargo APK and the Rust Android glue thing has ticked up since they asked for more contributors for when it's. I haven't seen there's definitely a flurry of commits. I don't know what the status on that is actively right now because I haven't been in contact with the people that have been managing that, but it is a thing that's some people are paying attention to and I believe are working on.
Yeah, that's great. I would. I've sort of been poking at those issues a little bit, but just getting Rust on Android and iOS too. You hit dependencies all the time that just don't work on those platforms, and you have to make PRs. And everyone's pretty accepting, and they take our PRs, which is nice. And then we can use OpenAL like on Android, things like that.
What about
Tyler, if a library wants to ahead of time attempt to ensure that their product will work on Android or iOS, do you have, or could you create like a page that describes do these things in your CI at least to build it? Like you don't have to run tests, but just get the crate to build, and that will be in a better than nothing state.
Yeah, totally. I could try and write a document up for that. But yeah, there's a repo that I have called Rust on Mobile that I was planning to add more stuff to, but it's a pretty good tutorial of how to set up a project on iOS using Rust. But yeah, there's no info on Android right now.
I have CI for iOS and Android on one of my repos, but it was set up by another guy, so I actually don't understand how it works at all.
Okay. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just running cargo check with that target, right? You don't even have to do any full build at all, really, or set up a project to run tests or anything, because we still haven't solved that problem. We don't know how to run tests. So just making sure it builds is really the bare minimum.
Yeah, for iOS at least we have Travis set up to test to just build stuff for when it's in. Like I said, we haven't figured out how to run tests, but it looks like it's pretty much just a matter of like setting your OS to X and then just like setting the target to iOS and then building it, and it works all right. I think the CI compiles at least.
Yeah, luckily Rust, if it works or if it compiles, it usually works. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you use for input and window events and things like that? Use SDL or?
Oh, we use WNet. Yeah.
Okay.
Pretty successfully.
That's good to know. And are there any other pain points you wanna mention or things that could be improved in general that would help you? Yeah.
Cargo particularly is, I feel like that's a weak point in our like daily life. So like we have a workspace project structure right now, and being able to set features on a project requires us to like pass in minus manifest path, and then the path to the actual executable you're running, and before you can give it any features. So that's one issue. There's not a lot of support for like building things as like custom as you want. So like passing in link args and things like that. There's like no granularity. You either pass the link arguments to every subcrate, or you pass it just to the executable. So just like some more fine-grained control would be a little nice there.
Does linking happen on non-binary builds? It sounds kind of crazy, but like when you're just building a library, does it interlink libraries just to create the sort of intermediate library? Or like what's the problem with having the linker args passed to every single part is I guess my question.
Well, some crates have in their like lib section, they have like crate type, and then they'll list like two different things. So like static lib and rlib. And whenever you build a crate, it builds both always, which is another side problem that slightly increases link time or just build times. So when it's building a static lib, then it's definitely linking. We're building like a CDY lib, and trying to think.
Right. Yeah, I've had that problem before. Now that you're sort of explaining what you mean.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. There's one dependency. Spear v cross has a couple different crate types listed, and they're a dependency of GFX. So that's definitely one of the places we've hit that. And then, of course, if one of your dependencies depends on like C or C++, then you're definitely linking just when you're building that crate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just so the problem is you can't choose to what things you're passing the linking arguments, if I understand it correctly, or
Yeah, just like more fine-grained control over link arguments mostly.
all right.
And a lot of that's like not crucial. It's just about optimizing our build times, trying to get our link times down.
What's your build time now for like a clean build and one where you modify one file, like gameplay or whatever you usually modify?
I think it's about 4 minutes for a clean build now.
Okay, that's not too bad. I mean,
that's lower than I was expecting.
Yeah, I was scared. Oh, half an hour. Okay.
Yeah, and our incremental, like just change one line is like around 3 or 4 seconds now. So pretty good.
Have you guys like done work to remove things such as like proc macros from like your dependency stack, or like try to like clean up those sorts of things to improve your compile times?
Yeah, recently we've been doing that, like killing failure and drive more and certain proc macro crates. But Yeah, not a whole lot. We sort of figured out that we were mostly link time was the big killer for daily life. Just changing one line and then having to relink for 10-20 seconds was killing us. So
How does one manage link time, if at all?
yeah, we used. Let me pull up the flags that we used here.
Yeah, I was definitely going to ask what settings you're using to debug, like with your daily development, and like do you turn optimizations on or not, and then also how you're releasing.
I saw a distressing talk the other day that said that O2 and O3 give basically identical effect, which was,
I also have heard that debug info is a very big problem for build time. Just like including it just adds in a whole lot of data, which takes up a whole lot of things that must be copied and dealt with during link time, etc.
Totally. Yeah, that's definitely one of the things we turned off to get our link times down. Yeah, and so the magic flag is C prefer dynamic, which links to the standard library dynamically, and just getting your final binary size down as small as possible really helped our link times, and that was part of it. We also turned incremental compilation off, which saved us a few seconds.
isn't that the opposite of how it's supposed to work?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Wait, what?
They said that turning off incremental compilation reduced link times.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening there. Like maybe incremental compilation creates a lot more build artifacts that have to be linked.
Could be.
How big are your binaries generally?
They sit for debug builds. I think they're about 40 megs now.
Okay.
And if we like totally strip everything out, they get down to about 6.
I remember seeing some conversation about adding support for dynamically linking every dependency you have in order to cut down on that. I'm not sure if that's gone anywhere, but was it worth like trying to pursue that more and get that into like cargo or compiler or wherever that needs to be supported to make that work?
Yeah, so that's actually a thing that is like for AAA studios, or for example, I think Unreal Engine does the same thing. They just split it all up into separate DLLs so you can just have much shorter compilation times. And that's also something that we're experimenting with for our scripting language. We just compile everything into a separate DLL that we can then hot reload. And that should reduce the compilation times anyway, because the file sizes are just much smaller.
Yeah, I would like that. That would be nice. Yeah, we've definitely looked into like trying to build more of our things as DLLs, but it's not. It looked tricky to try and get that going.
Yeah, cargo at the moment is not set up for that. Cargo can just do for one crate at a time, compile it into a shared library, and then you'll have to just at runtime look it up.
Yeah, you have to. If it's not too hard to like if you can reduce the API surface of a particular crate down to a few calls, then the actual code required to dynamically load that and then go through those few little bits isn't too hard to set up. But then your cargo build, like you have to set it up as a script where you have cargo build the newest version of the dynamic library as required, and then it builds the main program, and then the main program runs and gets the thing. So it definitely is not a good process. It's just a possible process.
There's stuff to talk about there with like post-build scripts, because that's something that I've seen like a lot of people asking for, because that would make that process significantly easier. But I don't think there's been any progress on that, on getting that implemented, or I'm
I
not
th-
even sure if that's something that the cargo team wants.
I think there's been pushback on that. I think that last I heard, their official position is that Cargo is not a build system and that they are not interested in post-build processing of any sort.
But it builds all of Rust.
Well, I think that and you think that. But
Well,
I think that it kind of sounds like something that that is not exactly like a stance that was arrived at because it's like one of those things where it's like it's a difficult scope to work on and it's a lot easier to build something big
yeah, I mean,
territory of like make and all of that and CMake and God forbid what else lies beyond in that barren wasteland.
yeah, but we've already got
It's a bit
pre-built
difficult.
ones,
it
and it seems like adding. Well, I suppose I'm preaching to the choir here, but like adding
Yeah.
in like stuff afterward, or like adding in a post-build hook doesn't seem like that much of a stretch from adding in a pre-build hook.
what
Just
I
use
have
pipes, haha.
Yeah, so what I did um is I just started making my own little cargo plugin thing. And so instead of running cargo build, you run cargo GBA, and that does all the intermediate steps, including the post build step. And maybe like there's cargo make is a plugin that is well supported and it has its own cargo makefile.toml format and stuff. And maybe we want to try and encourage people to use that if they need post build.
I mean, like then you're getting in a situation where like everybody wants like pretty much all the users like not all the users like a good amount of users want a feature, but then you just get a bunch of ecosystem fragmentation because the official stance is we aren't willing to do this, and like, you're getting this feature anyway. It's just that it's a much larger pain in the ass for pretty much everybody involved with using it.
I
I think
think
there's already regret about the pre-building script, and that may be part of why people don't want to add the post-build script.
what does cargo do if it's not a build system?
Dependency
Well,
management,
Yeah, that's one thing.
which
Is like
was probably the
dependency management and building are two separate problems.
yeah.
And having one tool that does everything for everyone in all of those spaces may just be a little bit too much. It makes a lot of sense to have something that gets people on the road quickly, helps people on board with the language to do the common case. But I do understand where they're coming from that for really more complex esoteric cases, trying to make cargo do everything for everyone might actually be harmful.
I kind of agree with that view, and it becomes in a sense make or VS Visual Studio plugin or whatever projects or whatever they are for the big Visual Studio. So the pre-built ones were a bit of a necessary evil when you have like C dependencies because you need to build them before you use them or whatever. In that use case, I do see why it sneaked in somehow. Not having them is way worse than having them, but not having post-built scripts is not.
It's not the worst
Yeah,
thing.
it's not the worst thing, and I think adding them is probably gonna create a lot of pain and maintenance in the end.
So
I'm not sure like what would be so painful about doing that though, because you've already got most of the infrastructure there for pre-built scripts. So I would assume, and again, it's
So-
software, so assuming is bad.
No,
But you'd be using mostly the same infrastructure like for after the stuff.
there are general concerns even in the bigger companies about even the fact that you basically run random code as you build something. It's slightly scary to many people because now you have a build rs file that gets all that job done, right? It's not even limited in any sort of way what you write there.
So the
So
cat's
there are
already out of the
various
bag.
concerns.
well, the cat is out of the bag,
Well,
but people
yeah,
try and put the cat back in the bag as much as they can.
Yes, there are already concerns with those kind of things, and I remember discussions on limiting the scope of what you can do in cargo build. For example, what files you can access and things like that. Which I do see a point to, actually.
I'm not entirely
in a
sure
way.
how you could do that because
Well,
One
Yeah.
proposal was to run things through WASM or other sandboxed environment where
yes.
you can, like, the build file can declare I'm going to be using the file system, or I'm going to be using the network, or whatever, and then at a high level you can
Yep.
say, like, no build script can use the network for this build, and if that makes a crate not work, then that's fine, just tell me it won't work and I'll solve it myself.
Yeah. And well, maybe having a way to ban it is also probably another way to solve this thing. So you can just disable the feature of having those. And if you manage to get a dependency that uses it, well, it fails, and then you can sort yourself out. And good luck.
I think a lot
But
of
there is some,
build.rs
yeah.
could be eliminated we if we had a better way of passing in linker args and stuff like that, because, like, that's all I use build.s for in Fermium, which is an SDL2 bindings thing. It just needs to link properly, but there's no way that I know of to do that outside of build.rs, because they tell you that's what you're supposed to do. But then that's a security concern, so...
Also, aren't
Well,
you still running arbitrary code while you're building because of procedural macros?
Yes, and people also want to put procedural macros in a WASM environment.
more or less.
That was a thread recently, actually, is can we put proc macros in WASM so that they are, one, more deterministic for deterministic builds, and two, we are able to very strictly control what they look at, both for the purposes of the compiler can be aware of what the proc macro is now touching so that it knows when to rerun the proc macro, and also for security concerns of, like, we don't want the proc macro doing anything we don't expect.
So if you're running pre-build scripts in WASM and like procedural macros in WASM, couldn't you also run post-build scripts in WASM and use the same sort of permission systems that you have for the pre-build script?
Sure, and once those systems are in place, I think we'd be in a stronger position to say that we want a
Okay.
post-build step. But right now, I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, so there was this thread. I'm gonna link the. I'm not sure if everyone read it, but there was a meeting with Google, Facebook, and a bunch of people from the Rust core team, and this was one of the discussions. These are basically the meeting notes, but you can see there.
Okay.
For example, Google has its own thing to deal with build.rs stuff. I think it was mentioned a few times.
There's a lot of things that bigger companies are going to want to have a build system that Cargo that's just not in scope for Cargo to do,
Yes.
and that in many cases they already have a solution for doing it.
Yeah.
So I do think that one direction Cargo should go in is playing nicely with other build systems and being able to be used just for dependency management.
Yeah. It might be just easier like that.
So I don't know if other people want to have a look at Cargo Make in the next 2 weeks and see if we could maybe add features there, or just, like, adjust a documentation for that to make it easier to use, and we could have something that people could start using soon without Cargo itself having to fully overhaul what they do, or if there's another Cargo plugin that I'm not aware of.
Okay. I made a note for that. What else would you like to discuss in the remaining time?
I think one topic was still for a future times, whether we keep it at this time or whether we want to change the time and move it 1 hour ahead so Dimitri can also join again, or just change it to another day completely.
Actually, like, if you're going to be moving the time slot, would it make sense to move it like so it's like for the like like American time, it's like in the morning, because that way we can also have Europeans joining in more easily without it being at late in the night.
Yeah, Kvark said 1 hour earlier, which
Yeah, he
in
said
me
that.
Mountain Time Zone, it's about 1:50 right now, so an hour earlier would still be totally acceptable for a time.
Yeah, in Central Europe time it would be 8. So that's doable.
I suppose we should just put a survey or something on the. I'll make a note to ask everyone because there's like people who aren't here, so
If we put a PR to the README to change the time, people can comment on the PR as well. So that might be a
yeah,
way.
That's a really good idea.
yeah, you
That
can just
seems
do that,
reasonable.
and then we can pick a number. Like, who wants to raise this PR?
I'll do it.
Okay,
Thanks.
then this was fixed. Wait, I had another question about. Where is my thing here?
I have a question for people that do professional game stuff. When you say that your builds are like 40 megabytes, is that a 40 megabyte executable and then there's additional assets, or is that the whole packed up thing is 40 megabytes?
So 40 megabytes is our debug build size. And that's just the binary. And then if you run an optimized build right now, I think it's sitting around like 6 megabytes.
Okay.
But I think that is with dynamic linking to the standard library, so it may go up a bit if we do an actual release.
And it's also, I think, very different because you guys are working with mobile games, which by nature just have to be a lot smaller as opposed to PC or console games.
The 6
For
megabytes
sure.
really nice though.
Well, yeah, I mean, for just the executable, I would believe that because a lot of like PC game size comes from huge art files, huge sound files, and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like Diablo 2 is like 5 or 10 megabytes, and then 700
This is way
megabytes of
back.
MPQ files.
Yeah.
Yeah, we pretty much have like a hard cap of it has to be under 150 megs. Otherwise, Apple won't let you download it over cellular connections.
Okay.
Last I remember, for Amethyst, for example, the space shooter game is about 5 megabytes when built.
Currently, people have sometimes been doing things like using include bytes to bring like an entire PNG file inside the binary and then parsing it in memory and stuff at runtime. How do you guys process asset files into a thing that your game runs?
Good question. That's sort of like an unsolved thing right now. So both Android and iOS have app thinning, and they require like you to package your assets in this like special way into asset catalogs, and then you have like 5 different versions of the same texture, and depending on what device is downloading the app, you get just one of those 5 textures, right?
Okay.
So include bytes is just not doable. We have to use like whatever proprietary stuff that they force on us.
It's very noble of you to actually follow their guidelines because I remember I did work at a mobile company at one point, and they like published like 20 versions of the same app at the same time, and like it would go through like Apple verification, and like 3 of them would be flagged for like one change, and then they would resubmit it without changing it, and then it would go through.
That's good.
Oh boy, yeah.
That's
It's good to know, though. Yeah, I didn't know you could do that.
Well, remember that it's always people at the end of the process, so sometimes you'll just get flagged for things that don't even make sense or like you've done for a long time, and then it's really a game of rolling the dice sometimes.
Good to know.
Do you have like physics in your game, and what libraries do you use for that?
I don't use specs physics because that library is terrible. I don't know whoever would ever use that one. Okay, nobody got the joke. I'm the author of that library. Just kidding.
No.
We currently have no physics in our games.
Okay.
That's
Like
a
a lot of
solution.
our projects are currently existing games anyway, are like, you know, solitaire, blackjack, things like that that really don't require that.
Yeah.
But you know, maybe our next game will. We'll see.
What graphical stack have you worked out, and is it different between Android and iOS?
Nope, it's totally the same. It's GFX. We just run GFX and, you know, backend Metal on iOS, backend Vulkan on Android.
So GFX HAL,
Yeah,
new GFX.
GFX
Wait,
HAL.
is Vulkan support good for you on Android? Like, how does that? That's something I'm very curious about.
Well, they just kind of upped their requirements for Vulkan support, I think, with the latest Android OS. And I think they're around 50 some percent of devices. Don't quote me
'Cause
on this.
I remember not even like a year ago, it was like a pretty bad story.
Yeah, it's
in terms
definitely,
of-
we're cutting users off for sure right now. So like all of our old games are on OpenGL, and if we do publish a new game using Rust, we would definitely be losing a chunk of people. But I think every year that's just going to keep decreasing the number of devices that don't support it. So
Okay.
it's sort of a gamble.
So is Rust for you guys still very much a work in progress? So no games are being released with Rust yet?
Correct. Yeah. So we haven't released anything yet, and we've really only been prototyping and just like getting our libraries down and making PRs to projects as necessary. Yep.
So what did your go ahead?
Oh, I was going to say, you said you use GFX HAL for the shader part of it and the other stuff. Do you use an algebra or CG math or other?
What do you mean the
For
shader part of it?
I'm sorry,
mean math?
the linear
Math
algebra
library.
portion of it that you inevitably need to do, like a little bit of linear algebra on the CPU side. Is that an algebra or
Well, we actually don't do a whole lot right now. I think we'd totally be open to an algebra, but we have our own custom geometry crate on. It's actually on GitHub called GEE.
Hey, that's my
That
last name.
that does like super basic stuff, and you know that's about what we need right now. So totally open to exploring other things. And
Well,
I think we do SpearV parsing though. Like speaking of shaders, we do parse SpearV, and just looking at what crate we use for that.
I do think that possibly an Amethyst, the lack of custom allocators in standard collections unstable, and trait specialization and all that, making it really difficult to do, like manage allocations from an algebra side, might become sort of a problem for us as we kind of work on managing our allocation strategies and all that.
I've never been clear on why an algebra has custom allocators for. I mean, I guess they have to because they only have one type. But for low dimensions, you don't need a custom allocator, do you? Is I guess my question.
Well, sometime I'd have to go back into my conversations with Janus on exactly what the details were of it, because I wasn't actually looking into the details of this, but I have a feeling that we're probably going to end up like having a forum post at least to discuss it a little bit, a la the Legion discussion.
There's kind of a lot of opinions about how memory should get managed in games, and different people do it different ways. And from my perspective, the main reason for it is just so you can budget different systems. So like if you need your physics heap, you know how much you're going to give to physics, particularly if you have a bigger team and you have a set memory and you are pushing the limit of the memory. It's like it's not okay for the network team to just add 4 megs of memory usage. Like there has to be a discussion and an agreement to increase the heap size. And
Right. But so I guess like within algebra, a 4 by 4 matrix or whatever is just 16 floats, and that I don't know why an allocator should be involved with that. Like either you
That's
allocate
the
it
current problem.
in the heap or it just goes on the stack or
Like
whatever, but it's all copy data. Can't move it.
That's the current problem, is that an allocator can be involved for some operations and it's difficult to manage.
Okay. Well, we'll put that as an action item to follow up on that.
Don't quote me on that, please.
Okay.
So for performance, it's all about
But that's what I
locality.
remember.
I'm sorry, what?
For performance, it's all about locality of your memory. So that's why you use a lot of custom allocators, because some memory is allocated just for the current frame, some is for double frame. So you only keep it, so it basically keeps a stack of the memory for the current frame. And then the next frame just resets that entire blob of memory. So you just try and do all of these tricks to make sure that you have a pre-allocated size of memory that you have cached as much as possible near where you're using it at that point in time. So that's why it's so important to have custom allocators for games.
Yeah, the biggest pain I have felt with custom allocators in Rust, the lack of frame allocator is really painful, where you can have basically a custom allocator that you just reset at the beginning of the whatever buffer you have, but you can also have like a linear allocator. You just pile up stuff, and that's super useful for render commands and things like that, where you pile up your render commands, and then at the end of a frame you just reset a pointer basically at the beginning of that buffer. So this is actually very painful if you want to do those kind of things right now.
You can get really close to that with drop code.
Not quite.
I've done it. You can't use it with the global allocator, but you have, if your type is designed to work with the linear allocator for a frame, then you can do it that way, and then it all drops at the end of the current loop.
Yes, but as long as you don't deallocate that memory, that's fine.
Yeah, because it's not deallocated.
Yeah, so the thing I'm saying is you have a buffer of memory, you malloced it or whatever, and then you fill it up, and then when you want to drop or you want to do that, you just reset your...
Yeah.
It sounds like that can be solved with libraries without going through the core language.
Not quite. It's not easy.
You can only do about
80. It's an
80...
intrinsically unsafe thing to do.
Yeah.
Skip destructors.
Yeah. It is, but it is used and it is useful, so...
You can get about 80% of the way there with libraries, but the language needs support for the last 20%.
Okay. It's not even that, but you can't even include
And when I say it's intrinsically unsafe, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying like I can understand why it's hard in Rust, because Rust tries to keep you from doing unsafe things. So
this kind of
naturally this is going to be hard.
Yeah, exactly. The other things work quite all right if you just do it at the object level instead of bunching up memory together for performance reasons. It's not that bad actually. But yeah, this was actually my biggest problem. But I think we're getting custom allocators at some point. They're being worked on, so that's exciting.
And you can change the global allocator, but it doesn't sound like that's what you're talking about.
No, so the global allocator isn't that much useful of a thing, because what you actually want is it's a bunch of different types of allocators for different things.
Okay.
So yeah, if you want, for example, a pool allocator for this kind of system, and that has been already, let's say, warmed up with the proper bucket sizes and so on, and another type of allocator, an arena allocator for that other type of system. So
Okay,
And you want a vector
That
in
make-
both
that-
systems, let's say, or whatever. An
that
array.
makes sense.
Yeah, so that's why it needs to be a bit.
I think the current proposal is something like you change box T to box TA, and then the A lets you tag the box as where it came from and goes back
Where
to.
it goes.
Yeah.
And A just defaults to global allocator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
But
posted the working group in the Hangout chat for custom allocators and standard collections, which is difficult to keep track of because there's a lot of pull requests and issues in the Rustling repository, and so that's why they kind of opened that up there so that's a little bit easier to keep track of.
where is that?
If you click on the chat in the bottom left of the Hangouts call,
I am not seeing that.
Also,
Not
I
seeing
don't.
either.
I just see my message.
it's okay. It's rust-lang/wg-allocators. So
Found it.
Okay.
I do suspect there's quite a bit of crossover with this working group and the embedded working group and several other smaller groups that are in the space. And like for example, the placement new, it may be worth reaching out to them to see if it's something that is useful for their space also.
there's likely a lot of people overlap as well. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't speak from firsthand, but I'd imagine that quite a few people overlap between these groups.
Maybe. I'm not actually sure. All right. So, is there anything else you want to mention or bring up for discussions for next time? Or
I'm gonna make the issue for the October 2 meeting, and if there's anything in between now and then, just add it to that issue.
yeah, perfect.
I think
And
if
you
we
think,
don't have the
yeah,
schedule for that meeting already booked, memory allocation would probably be a good thing to revisit and maybe to discuss kind of offline in the next couple weeks.
I think we should go through the current proposal again and make sure we're not missing anything from what that will bring us at the end. Probably. It seemed fine when I looked at it, but I think it's definitely value in looking at it again and making.
I could be wrong, but I think that custom allocator crates is kind of like an open space right now, especially since the alloc trait is so new. And so, like, it's kind of a space where people can kind of start publishing things that be really useful for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I had 2 points. One is that 2 meetings ago we were discussing the ecosystem guide and potential changes that we could do in order to get a better understanding of the ecosystem and try and collaborate with Are We Game Yet? And I proposed a couple of things, and I tried getting feedback from Claudia Doppio Slash, who I think is the person managing Are We Game Yet? But I didn't get any response, so I was just wondering, like, does anyone have another way of approaching her, or otherwise should we try and do something on our own to try and provide some kind of overview of the ecosystem?
I think they said to like just go ahead and file the PR, and then the discussion can happen in the PR issue.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I remember from a previous issue.
Okay.
But I don't remember where that was.
Okay, I'll just try that then. And the
So
other,
if you,
yeah, go ahead.
no, so what I want to say, if we have some PRs to open there and add fields or items or things like that to the current page, I think they're open to accept it. but not moving the repo or anything like that. So, which is fine.
And the other point was revolving around like our output as a working group, like creating a tangible change. There was a bunch of things that were proposed in the previous meeting as well, and I was just running through them to see like what was mentioned there. And there's quite some things that haven't been acted upon yet. So like there's more things that come up that we'd like to solve, but not enough people, or like probably mostly not enough time to do it because most of us are all doing it in our spare time. So like try and come up with a way to properly catalog things that we want to do, and then also prioritizing them and putting our efforts towards the things that we want to solve most, I guess.
Yeah. What issues were you?
So I was just reading through the minutes from the previous meeting, and I was seeing a couple of things. For example, about the audio, there was mentioned that we need better bindings for Wise, and we needed to explore more low-level audio, similar to how Vulkan works for graphics cards, but then apply it to audio, so manually allocate until buffers and so on. I don't think anything has happened with that yet, and I'm not sure if there's an issue to track that. Then I also saw there was something to ask Embark specifically about the audio. I don't think that has been done, but we can just do that in the Discord now, since Johan Anderson is there. And then I saw that Locafor, but I forgot to ask that, had mentioned about building pipelines for consoles. So there's a bunch of things that we still need to do, and some require more work, obviously, like bindings for different C libraries, if there are any public C APIs.
I think it's you need to pay for Wise, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think so too.
So
I think
if that's the case, it's not gonna happen. Realistically speaking, but I'm not sure if they changed their like if they have like a free version or anything.
To your sort of issue at large, I think if we had more issues in the tracker that were smaller and more focused, and I think we could do a little bit better with tagging and triage so that people could sort through, like, I'm a sound guy, what are sound related issues and stuff like that. Then that would help our approachability.
I do agree with that, and even having it easier to find in general with better tags, or maybe creating more repos once things get settled.
We should probably also add the survey to something to bring up at the next meeting.
I think, yeah, they were working on publishing the results, I believe, but I didn't check.
I think last I saw Erland was 80% done with
going through
the responses.
Yeah. I'll mention it to him. All right. Cool. I'll add the notes later today or tomorrow because it's getting actually quite late here. So thanks for attending, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
See you next time. Bye.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm actually not going to be here next week. Just letting you guys know.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.